Hello and welcome to The Game Changers. I'm Sue Anstis, and this is the podcast where you'll hear from trailblazing women in sport who are knocking down barriers and challenging the status quo for women and girls everywhere. What can we learn from their journeys as we explore key issues around equality in sport and beyond? I'd like to start with a big thank you to our partners Sport England, who support The Game Changers through a National Lottery Award. I'm excited to say that in this, the 18th series of The Game Changers, I'll be talking to founders and entrepreneurs, the women who have set up organisations that help change the landscape for all women and girls in sport. My guest today is Danielle Sellwood, a former sportswear designer, trend forecaster and women's sport publisher who now shares diverse stories of sport and adventure through powerful documentaries made by her company Find It Film. In 2008, Danielle co-founded Sports Sister, a trailblazing sports website and magazine for women. And from 2012, she directed visual campaigns at the Women's Sport Trust, helping create lasting change in the representation of female athletes. Danielle is now a self-taught documentary maker, primarily creating content featuring women, the disabled community and older people. Danielle's passion for filmmaking was born from frustration over the lack of diverse representation in sport and adventure films, so she picked up a camera and set to work to redress the balance. Alongside this work, Danielle's an expert in making content and film accessible via open captions and audio description. Danielle's also a former GB canoeist who in recent years has turned her hand to triathlon, swimming, cycling and surfing. Danielle, I think of all the guests I've got in this fabulous new series, you're the one I've known the longest, probably from when you were first running Sports Sister back in 2008. So I wonder if we can start there and maybe tell us about Sports Sister and what it was and how it started.
Yeah, no, I mean, gosh, 2008. I mean, it's crazy to think so long has gone since then. And we thought, I mean, at that time I was working in trend forecasting. So sort of the tail end of my sort of design career, I guess. When the internet came out, obviously we could all access stuff from all around the world. So trend forecasting for the fashion industry just became like such an instant thing. And we would travel around the world. We'd take photographs of what was going. So I'd go to the X Games or surf beaches and photograph what everyone was wearing. And then we'd upload it to the internet and everybody quite quickly could see what was happening in different places. So it was an amazing thing. So I learned all of my sort of kind of craft of using the internet as a tool to communicate there. But of course, the trouble with trend forecasting is that you spend all your time looking for the gaps in the market and seeing what's coming up. And some of them don't get filled. So I worked specifically in sport, and women's sport was still just so light years behind men's sport at that time. There really was nothing. There were no real magazines. They were all fitness magazines, which was not really about women's sport. So it was all about body beautiful and, slimming, all that kind of thing. And the only information that you kind of got about women's sport was just snippets in the newspaper, which, as you'll know, Sue, was very few and far between, and a certain type of reporting as well. So women were always, like in context of, I don't know, whether they were a mother or what their job was, or were they the wife of somebody, or were they good looking or blonde or whatever. It was, there was always another side to it, aside from their sport. So myself and Louise Hudson decided that we would fill this gap for a media outlet for women's sport. In our kind of naive way, we thought, we'll rebrand sport for women. So that was what we set out to do. And gosh, it was hard. It was amazing, but it was so hard because everybody knew this was needed, but because it was in everyone else's eyes really early, in my eyes really, really late in happening, it was really, really difficult to get support. Financially, it was incredibly hard. But we set up a website, we even did a print magazine, and we basically started reporting on all the women's sports stories that just weren't getting any coverage.
And I remember at the time, so I was running a sports PR agency, but I mean, Sports Pistol was the place to go to get coverage. But I remember having conversations with you probably a bit later around, it was amazing that all these people wanted all this coverage, but the brands and others weren't, as enthusiastic to fund that space, perhaps in the way that they are now. So why do you think, were you just too early? I mean, it does almost feel like you were just way ahead of your time in terms of the product.
Yeah, we were definitely early in terms of a commercial product. Like everybody knew there was a need. I mean, we know that because, as you say, all the PRs, everybody, all the sports, as soon as people knew that we existed, we were inundated with people wanting us to report on their sport or their athlete or their product. But the brands would not support it in any sort of sustainable or, significant way, because we just didn't have the numbers at that point. It's the eternal problem of being a startup. It's chicken and egg. They won't support until you're big enough. But how do you get big enough without the support? So we would get huge brands send us an advert for our print magazine, a full page advert, and say, well, this will look really good if you put this in, because all the other brands will think that you're getting lots of money and then they'll support you. But, and we tried it a couple of times. We put ads in for free, but it just, it was always a struggle. It was always a struggle. Actually, the one thing that we did get some stability at one point, because when the Women's Super League started, Sally Horrocks really kindly kind of supported us by getting us to do the match day program. So that kind of gave us a bit of an extension on what we were doing. So we did like the first 2 or 3 years of the match day programs, which was amazing, but also really challenging, because like a lot of the clubs didn't even have a photograph of everybody, all the women that were playing. So, it was an extraordinary time of this kind of huge growth in women's sport and this kind of real understanding that women's sport needed coverage and needed support. But it was, there were still so many balls in the air, and it's felt like that for probably 10 years. And I must just say, we did this one cover. I think it was with Beth Tweddle, because we used to do our own. We had an amazing photographer, Sean Mallion, who for a paltry fee used to come and do a front cover, a beautiful front cover photo for us. And that was really important. The visuals were really important because we wanted to show these women as athletes in really beautiful photography. So we had this amazing, I'm pretty sure it was Beth Tweddle. Anyway, the title was something like The Golden Age of Women's Sport. And that was like in 2010. And here we are in 2024, and I don't know if we're quite there yet, but maybe we're getting there now, sort of 14 years later.
I love that about Sally Horrocks. That's so nice to hear as well, isn't it? When you look at all that she's doing now, it's like, women supporting women and all the rest. So what happened to it in the end? And I guess how did you feel at the end of that? Because I guess I remember being not part of that journey, but witnessing from afar and seeing the print edition and 50,000 run and hoping it would grow. And obviously then it didn't. And how did you step back from that? How was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, in about 2013, so it was just after London 2012, we'd kind of reached the end of our own, ability to sort of fund it. We had a couple of people come in to help. Gary Cole was one, people that really supported it, but it needed proper, serious investment. And Tri North actually came on board, who were running cricket magazines and various other bits and pieces for sports associations. So they took it on and employed me. Louise at that point left, went on to Pastures New, and I carried on for a couple of years with their support. And again, it was a bit like sort of starting again. It was like another level up with some stability and some support. And we had some conversations with Sky Sports and various other people that really wanted it to succeed. But, it was still a real struggle. And eventually it got to a point where I just needed to move on. And, it just, after a while, it just becomes a bit soul destroying, really, when you can only struggle on for so long. But we had some incredible highlights, like we got Olympic accreditation for 2012, which was phenomenal. I imagine we're probably the first all-female focused magazine to get that. I don't know, but certainly there weren't any others there. But it was hard, and we always said afterwards, that if we'd have known how hard it was going to be, we wouldn't have done it. financially it was a massive struggle for a very long time. But we're glad we didn't know, because we did some incredible things. We spoke to some amazing women, and hopefully we made a small difference to a lot of sportswomen's lives and small start-up brands by giving them a bit of coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And others' attitudes, with that hold on the shoulders of others that came before us, but also other women now in that space and doing more that saw and witnessed and were a part of that too. I'm going to take you back, if I can, to your younger days. Where did you grow up, and how was sport part of your life as a young person?
Oh, yeah. So I grew up in Bath from the age of 6. And I was always, so like at school, I had like 2 skills, I suppose, that stood out, and that was sport and art. Yeah, I was always sporty, and my brother was very sporty, and my parents my dad in particular was just very supportive of women's sport. There was never any distinction or that I shouldn't be doing sport. And my brother got into canoeing at school. There's a bit of a joke in our family that it was the last sport available, and he was late arriving at the day where you chose what you wanted to do. But for whatever reason, he ended up doing canoeing. And I used to go along, and he'd go to races on a Sunday. It was your classic, Sunday morning, driving off somewhere to do a race, and I'd kind of tag along. And I do have like one really, really clear moment where I was stood on this bank of this canal on a cold winter's, morning, and this young girl came past, and very uncharacteristically for me, as I'm sure you'll agree, Sue, I actually thought, I could do better than that. I just looked at her and I thought, come on, speed up. And I don't know, it was just something in me. I just thought, I'm sure I can go faster than that. And, and I'm not a particularly arrogant person, but it was a very overwhelming feeling. So I just kind of took up canoeing then and just got involved. And I had been doing gymnastics and trampolining in the days of kind of all inspired by Olga Korbut and Nadia Comaneci. That was our big thing as we were children, or young girls growing up. So I'd done a lot of those sorts of, more traditional female sports, I guess. And then, canoeing is like the most unglamorous sport you could possibly imagine, especially back then. It's cold, you get very wet, and there's no interest in it whatsoever, really, from the media. So, but it didn't matter to me. I really enjoyed it, and I was quite good at it. And I think, if you're good at something and you have a bit of success early on, you become like junior champion or whatever, then obviously, you like that feeling and you want to get better. And I've always been someone that just likes to improve and learn and constantly progress. And so I ended up representing Great Britain as a junior, and then as a senior. And then a bit later on, I got into very long distance races. So there's one that starts in Devizes in the West Country and goes all the way and finishes in central London. It's like 125 miles. So I did that 3 times. We set a couple of records that stood for a long time. And it was, I think anyone that's involved in a sport for a long period of time from a youngish age, you just build such strong bonds and friendships that just stay with you for life. And it was a huge part of my life. And I would also say that, it did give me a sort of inner strength and an inner confidence that I don't know whether I would have had otherwise. I think you put up with a lot of challenging conditions, you put up with losing, you put up with being worn out and being able to do more than you think you can, and having routine and all those things. And it was hugely important and influential on my life.
Yeah, so you mentioned inner strength, bloody 125 miles. That's extraordinary, isn't it? So what does that take to do a race like that, or a event of that kind? That seems enormous.
Yeah, I know it is. It is a bit nuts. And to be honest, even beforehand, I didn't imagine how you could do that, because the longest we did any races at that point, very unusually, we might do a 3 or 2 or 3 or 4 hour race. And this is like 17, 18, 19 hours, depending on what the flow's like. I kind of got a little bit I suppose a little bit duped into it. Our coach at the club, Brian Greenaway, he was a veteran of this race, and he obviously saw something in me. And there's a series of races that you do, a lot of people that do this race would do, called the Waterside series, and they take place on the course. And there's 4 of them, and they get longer and longer, and you kind of do. So we did those, and then so I don't know, it felt like it was only 2 weeks before the long one. He just said, well, should we do the long one then? And I was like, okay, how do we go from doing 5 hours to doing 17 hours? But we did it. And again, I still don't really understand how that is possible. You know, the longest you've canoed for is 5 hours, and then you do 17 hours. You know, obviously it's not easy, but you go along. I guess it's broken up, and you have a support crew, and you go through the night, and, you know, like there's different stages to it and magical moments going, you know, when it's dark, or you get fed as you're going along. And I think it's just quite exciting being part of something like that. It's almost like this little secret club of all these people going down. It's a double canoe. So if you're doing the through race all the way in one hit, it's a double canoe. So you're not on your own. But there are funny moments as well. Like, so we got to Reading. So you go along the canal to Reading, and then you go on the river from Reading down to central London. And we were at Reading doing our kit change. So you were stood on this damp riverside. Someone's just taking your clothes off and putting new ones on. You know, as I said, it's not glamorous. And then we got back in the boat, and they just said to me, keep talking to Brian, he's falling asleep. I was thinking, how can you fall asleep in the middle of the Thames? You know, like, oh my God, that's really terrifying. And then the third time I did it, we actually got lost. We went in the dark. So I was doing it with Steve Baker, and we were a really good crew, and we actually ended up coming third out of everybody, all the men, and, you know, it was amazing. But we got lost on the Thames, which is ridiculous. But it was just such we got confused, and it was so dark. We went round on one of the islands on the Thames and ended up going back upstream. And I was like, Steve, the moon's moved. Which I know sounds stupid. But, you know, bear in mind, we had been canoeing for God knows now, like 10 hours at that point. And I'm like, there's definitely something's different here. And then we saw this crew coming, ahead of us, coming towards us. And I'm like, and we just suddenly went, oh no, like, turned around. I mean, we'd only lost a couple of minutes, but, you know, you just can't believe that you do those kind of crazy things. And, you know, I mean, the people that live along that route, it must be really weird, because at every Easter, you've got these people walking around with torchlight in the, you know, through the middle of the night, sneaking along the riverbank, trying to find their crew to feed them, you know, fig rolls or something. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you're a GB athlete, so representing the country. How different was it then? Because that was pre-lottery, without aging you and me, but that was kind of pre-lottery funding and UK sport and so on. So what was that experience like, and what was the gender balance like in terms of being a female athlete at that time? Yeah,
I mean, it was... to be honest, it was it was incredibly amateur. You know, like we had those old like cotton shirts that had basically just got a print of a stripe on the front, like done by somebody in their back room kind of thing. You know, there was no performance fabrics or anything like that. So the kit and all of that was very basic. We did have Adidas tracksuits that were those kind of shiny with a fluffy inside, if you remember those. But I mean, the women's team was much smaller, so there was generally only 4 women. So you had a K1, which was single, K2 double, and K4 for 4, because we did sprint canoeing. So you tended to have 4 or just 2 women in the team, as opposed to the men who would have like at least 7 in the team, if not more. In terms of how we were treated, we were just treated as the women's team in the same way as the men's team. You know, we trained as hard. I didn't find it in any way sort of patronising towards the women. We were just athletes the same. But I do know that I did feel quite isolated socially away from the sport. Isolated in the sense that I just didn't know anybody else that did sport, that like at school or friends or anybody. There was literally nobody that did sport in any kind of semi-serious way. And so I kind of had like 2 lives. You know, I had the sporting life with my friends in canoeing, and then I had my normal life, which was kind of like doing my art, or it's kind of punky era, and kind of being a very different sort of person there. And I did seek out, I remember seeking out some kind of cultural, you know, like reference points really. And I sent off it would have been one of the earliest sort of iterations of the Women's Sport and Fitness Foundation. They did a newsletter, and you could send off a stamped addressed envelope and get it sent back in the post like once a month or every quarter or something. I can't remember. And there were a couple of books. I remember buying some books. There was one called Grace Under Pressure by Adrienne Blue. And then there was another one, Lynn Guest de Swart, I think it was, called Women and Sport. And I kind of like, I sought out those sorts of things to try and find something that felt relevant and kind of made me feel part of something, I suppose. I mean, I didn't really find that thing that made me feel part of a group of women that loved sport. And I'm sure that formed all of that desire to sort of set up something like Sports Sister to kind of give young women that sort of sense of being part of something great, you know.
Yeah, so that's so interesting, isn't it? How different it is now, and how you already had that appetite to discover more about it. You mentioned the kit that you were competing in, and I know you started your career working in sportswear design, so working for some major brands over a decade. So what were you doing there, and what was women's sportswear? Was that in women's sportswear specifically you were working?
No, not specifically. Because women's sportswear wasn't really much of a thing then. So again, you know, yeah. So this is where I kind of combined my two skills, so sport and art. So I was either going to go down the art route or I was going to go the sport route, but I was not very good at science. So I ended up doing fashion and textiles, not really thinking about sport anymore, apart from just enjoying it. But then I was like cycling to my art college on my racing bike with my mounting jacket and my rucksack on my back, and like everyone else is wafting around in Vivienne Westwood or something, or, you know, their own creations. And actually one of my first year tutors, Guy Mathieu, he said to me, have you thought about designing sportswear? And I was like, no. He's like, well, I think you should have a go. You know, it feels like that's what you should do. And I remember at the end of my first year, like it was like the heyday of like windsurfing, and everything was like luminous and bright. And so I did a project around windsurfing, and then, so kind of the rest is history, really. It combined that thing, and I ended up doing a work placement at the end of my second year doing ski wear at Nevica Skiwear, if anybody remembers that. Also very bright and luminous and very late 80s. And then they funded my collection, because if you do fashion, you have to put together like a collection for your degree show. And I went to work there full time straight after that. So, I worked for Nevica and Puma. I designed Sheffield Wednesday football kit. So that was, it was mostly men's stuff to start with. I would say it was probably 85% was menswear at Puma at that point. Actually, when I was doing their athletics kit, so it was the time of Linford Christie and Colin Jackson, so I designed their kit. But I was like, so you've got some female athletes here that you sponsor, but you haven't actually got any kit for them. It's like, can't we just make some kit for them, So we did, I kind of forced that issue a little bit. And so like, even if we just do some sample runs, because every time you design something, you get samples in. I'm like, even if we just do the samples and they have the samples, then at least they'll have some kit. Yeah, we did that. And it did change pretty quickly after that. I kind of went freelance after that and worked for Marks and Spencer's and places like that. And they were brilliant. They really wanted to get into the whole sportswear area and did a lot of good stuff early on. And so I had quite a mixed career, and I did really, really enjoy it for a good period of time. I think I really enjoyed, the technical side of it, that it was, you're buying stuff because you need it for a purpose rather than a sort of a frivolous reason of just needing another item or something. And I suppose I was, I would never be able to do it now in the world of sort of fast fashion, because I just really not comfortable with that. I always felt with sportswear at that time that, there was a real purpose to designing it. I actually wrote my dissertation for my college course on the evolution of sportswear and how it has affected athletic performance. And it was basically that I was like outlining how, what you wear makes you feel better and go faster. So that whole sort of point of it for me was great. And I guess then performance fabrics started coming in, and the world really started taking off. And by the time I stopped designing sportswear, it was women's sportswear was very well established, and Sweaty Betty and places like that had, come along and stirred things up a bit, and it was in a much better place. And that's when I kind of started moving away from it, really.
It's interesting though, isn't it? When you think of that, it doesn't feel that long ago that there wasn't any. And then I wonder how you feel now when you look at what there is, when we've had issues, even in Paris, haven't we, around the women's kit being, much more objectified, much more revealing clothing, etc. So almost like we didn't have it, and then we've had it, and it's massively over feminized too. So what are your thoughts on where we are now with women's sports clothing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly conflicted on this whole issue. I've always wanted women to be strong and concentrate on the sports side of it. And, I found it incredibly frustrating over the years that we were always told, even when I was doing sports, we would be sent photographs of sexualized women, like that was their key asset. Even we went, I think it was about 2009, we went to a women's sport conference and it was all women apart from a couple of blokes. And one bloke stood up and said, basically, all you've got is your sex to sell yourself. If you want to make money, girls, that's what you've got to do. And I just was so incensed by that sort of attitude. And I had kind of it was not the same at all, but when I was doing the canoeing, obviously it's a very minority sport, and someone did, one of the major newspapers did take an interest in the third time I did it, when it looked like we would be in the top 3 out of everybody, all the blokes and everybody. And I said to the journalist after the interview, well, what's the chance of us getting featured? And she said, well, you've got blonde hair. So, as long as the photos come out well, I reckon there's a really good chance. And I was just absolutely fuming. And I didn't play ball, and I tied my hair up and I put my canoe kit on for the photo shoot, because that's what I am. I'm a canoeist. And, guess what? We didn't get featured because the photos didn't come out great. I didn't play the game. I guess that's why I'm conflicted, because I do understand why some women do feel the need to play the game or enjoy playing that game, But I think it's absolutely essential that we see all types of women represented, all body types. You shouldn't have to look like a supermodel to get coverage, and it does still carry on. And I do think it is changing, but it is a constant battle, and possibly even at a point where, because more money's coming into the sport, maybe that is actually becoming an issue again. I hope that there's enough women working in the industry now, as opposed to then when it was so much more male dominated. I hope that there's enough women in there to try and keep the balance right, that we have all types of women represented, strong women, tall women, small women, all types, every type of woman needs to be represented. So in terms of the clothing and what people will wear, I think it's challenging because you wear what you wear as your kit. So in athletics, they wear the little knickers and the little tiny crop tops, and they're so used to wearing that. That is just their culture. They don't think anything of it. And I think, we used to wear little lycra shorts and a fitted top. I literally didn't think anything of it. I certainly didn't think that I was being sexy by wearing that, But I guess other people might have seen it in another way because it's completely fitted. And I think we have a sort of an issue where, people want to feel part of that culture of what the look of that sport is, and I think, personally, I think some of the swimwear is incredibly skimpy these days, but I recognise that they're all wearing the same outfit, which means if they want to feel part of that, they kind of want to, wear the same as everybody else. I don't know how you stop that happening, or if it's our role to do that, but I do find it problematic. And I suppose what I would like to see is certainly more athletes demanding options and alternative outfits that they can wear, that they feel comfortable in. And that doesn't mean that you have to be super skinny to wear one outfit or, stronger to wear another. I think, whatever makes you feel comfortable and make you feel that you can perform at your best is the most important thing. But I think, the world of Instagram and everything else has kind of set us back in terms of so many of these young women know that their value lies in how they look. And everyone's scrabbling around for sponsorship, and it's a minefield, really. It's a minefield.
Yeah. Our paths actually then crossed again at the Women's Sport Trust, where I was an early trustee and you were the director of visual campaigns. So again, more of that work of how we represent women. And what are you proud of? What are you most proud of? There were lots of kind of campaigns and activities. So is there anything that springs to mind in terms of the work that you did there?
So, yeah, I mean, what an amazing time that was with Tammy and Joe setting up Women's Sports Trust. And they just got in touch with us when we were doing Sports Sister, actually. And then we kind of, we were all kind of sharing our contacts. Shelley Alexander from the BBC, head of women's sport at that time, and all these different people that were kind of contributing to try and join all the dots of women that were kind of doing their thing on their own and bring everybody together, which was amazing. And I like to think, again, like Sports Sister, I think we made a big impact as a group of people. I mean, the Game Changers Awards was incredible, being able to highlight people doing great stuff. I always love to champion what other people doing great things. And some of the categories were really, really hard because we just didn't have enough, like where are the great ad campaigns at that time? And, some things we had to work really hard to find things to fill those categories, but that was great. But we also did, one of the earliest projects I did with Women's Sports Trust was a photographic exhibition that KPMG very kindly offered to support and host in their offices. And it was basically seeking out some of the best sports photography of women. And this was following on from our covers that we'd had done at Sports Sister. So looking at photographs of women looking strong, doing their sport, but top quality, beautifully done photographs. And that was an absolute joy to do. And my absolute favourite was one of Christina Huragu in a sort of start position. And it is the most extraordinary, beautiful photograph of a strong woman at the top of her game and her, her physique and her strength and her determination and her eyes. It was absolutely stunning photograph. And that image always stays with me.
That's so interesting, because when I put that question in, it was that image that I still think of. For me, that is such a powerful... Actually, if I can find it somewhere on the internet, I'll put it in the show notes, a link to it on the show notes, people can see it. Because I think for me, and across all of that time, that image kind of meant so much. I think it was, as you say, such a powerful piece.
Also, there's such a nice link for me with Christina Huragu, because we had her as our first cover of our very first pamphlet that we did as Sports Sister. We got a photograph of her from Adidas that they let us use. So she was our first cover. So I got a lot of time for Christina Huragu and her talent. Yeah, lots of synergy there. It's lovely. And
you're now making brilliant, inspiring content at Find It Film. So how did that process start? How did it begin? And what were the first pieces that you made in terms of documentary content?
Yeah, so I'd actually met Nicola Waterworth was part of Women's Sports Trust. She was on the board, and we kind of both crossed over a bit into the sort of outdoor area. So not pure sport, but the more outdoor sports areas. We were both going to film festivals like the Banff Mountain Film Festival and Kendal Mountain Film Festival, and they have these tours. And I'd been taking my kids to them from very early, and we'd go along and there would be, stories of surfing and climbing and, all sorts of quite extreme sports and, lots of blokes doing crazy snowboarding stunts and stuff. And there was one film that I had seen, and I'm trying to think how long ago it was. It's hard to say, but my daughter was only like early teens and she's 23 now. So I guess it's like 10 years ago. And there was a film called Spice Girl about Hazel Findlay, who's a climber, and she was doing this sheer rock face, I think with her dad. And it was quite a short film. And she was just really engaging and really interesting to listen to. And she was doing this absolutely, incredible climb. And I sat there and I honestly, I can still remember how I felt. I was just like, it gave me so much energy. I was so excited, but also kind of like, I was such a shot of adrenaline to see this young, very modest, but incredibly talented woman climbing this rock. And I was like, I just had like this driving force in me that I was like, this needs to be seen in every school. Every schoolgirl should see this film. I was almost like incensed that, it was only at this festival and it was only like being shown to people that were already on board with that whole concept that, women can be like this. So actually, Nicola and I decided we'd do a women's sport film festival ourselves, so we could bring together all these like nuggets and put them into one festival. So we did that, and we ran a festival in Bristol. And actually, it was quite hard to find that many women's films to bring along, and we had no idea how the industry worked. It was just like, we should just do it. I mean, that's kind of how I am. Like, I was like, if there's a gap in something, I'm just going to do it myself. So kind of waded in naively, and we did it, and it was great, and I loved it. But one of the points of it was that I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we did a little film about somebody in Bristol or a team in Bristol? So I actually got this filmmaker to do a little short film about our women's basketball team, so that we could then invite all those young women and girls to the screening, and they'd like feel part of something and, special, seeing themselves on the big screen. And so we did that. But we didn't have much money. He'd only do a very short film. It was like 2 minutes or something. And then he owned it and we couldn't show it anywhere else. And I think that just made me absolutely fuming, because I was like, well, what else are you going to do with this film? You're not going to make money out of a 2-minute film about some women, young girls in Bristol, So I just thought, right, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm just going to learn how to do it myself. And then we'll own the films and then we can show them to everybody and put them out there. And that's kind of how I got started. And again, absolutely naively. I mean, it's taken me a long time to learn all the technical side of it. And I'm miles from knowing all the technical stuff. But I just learned by doing, really. So I kind of got a reasonable camera that I could just about afford. And then I just started making short films about people, or just going up to, asking people, would you mind? I'd really like to just do a 3-minute film. And then actually Ellis Brigham, who I knew from my days of doing Sports Sister, they wanted to do some women's content. So they actually funded us with a camera person to do 5 shorts. And I wanted to do something about how it feels to do sport. So the series I called Engage Your Senses. We had a canoeist, we had a climber, we had someone that was doing lots of different marathons who'd never run a marathon before, and they were all different stories, and ocean rower. But what we really focused on was what each of these women got from it, what it gave them, how it felt, what the emotions were, why someone might want to do it again. What is it that makes you keep going back to do it again? So it was really tapping into that other side of it that was nothing about competition or achievement, and very much about the experience of doing sport. And I loved doing that. I kind of this is where it's at for me. This is what it's about. And then I just, I got involved with the ocean rower from that, Leah Ditton, went on to do an incredible row from San Francisco to Hawaii. And I worked with her on her film, which I didn't have to film any. We just used all the footage that she had taken, and we kind of made it into a sort of 30-something minute film. And that was an incredibly dramatic story, but also incredibly authentic. And what a woman to row, not as part of a competition or an event, but just completely on her own from San Francisco to Hawaii. Absolutely incredible. And to be able to do all the engineering and electrics that you need on the way and all the other things that are required. Stunning. It was amazing performance. So I made that film, and that got picked up by a couple of film festivals. And then I guess, once you start, it's a tiny bit of success, then you can sort of start asking people if they wouldn't mind funding something. And so my next film was around older women doing sport. So we started that before the pandemic. I'd met Alex Rotas, who had been involved in our Game Changers Awards at the Women's Sports Trust, because she's been taking photographs of older athletes for probably 15 years now. And she'd been telling me some of these incredible stories of women, and I just thought, oh, my goodness, these are amazing stories. Let's make a film. We got some funding from Independent Age, and we started just focusing on 4 women and making a film. It was very late running and massively over budget because of the pandemic, but we got it out there, and it's, we're just finishing our little cinema run with it, and that's been, it's been very enjoyable.
You're 50, you had 50 screenings.
Yeah, we did. I mean, some of them were during the day, and it's so challenging without any marketing budget, and it's very difficult to get a film out there. But I was really determined that, and Alex was too, that we wanted communities to come to it and watch it, and have an experience together of watching it. We could have just sort of put it out on YouTube or Vimeo or whatever. And we knew that from our film festival experiences, that people were very deeply affected by it, and they wanted to talk about it afterwards. And every time we've done a Q&A, we just can't get rid of people, at the end, they want to stay and talk because it's made such a difference. And men and women, we had a man at Kendall who had just recently had a stroke before he saw it. And he was very emotional because he thought his life as he knew it was over. And he was in his 60s, and then he'd seen this 85-year-old woman doing the 100 meters who'd had a stroke, and it basically gave him the kick up the arse that he needed, as he said.
It's an amazing film, and that amazing woman, it's like how she takes the bends because it affects one side of her body. She's so open about the way in which she then approaches her running. It's amazing.
Yeah, so that's Dot. So she's our oldest one, and she's actually 86 or maybe even 87 now. And because she's had a stroke on one side, she can't on the indoor track. It's like going up a hill for her. But we also had Sue Yeomans, who's a pole vaulter, and she only took up pole vaulting when she was in her late 40s. I mean, that is something else, right? And then we had Joylyn, who struggled an awful lot with her mental health over the years, but her running, I mean, she is, if she had had the opportunities as a young woman, I have no doubt she would have been an Olympic champion even, staggeringly talented woman. And so she runs and throws. She was wonderful. And then we had Noel, who was a race walker. I really wanted to cover lots of different types of sports, to give a bit of a cross section. I think, definitely having some fields events in there, and then the walking, which is much lesser known. And the race walking, I just don't know why that's not. Someone needs to make that a bigger thing, because
I know.
Like she says, as people get older, the fact that, you do get niggles, you do get injuries, like race walking is just brilliant for that. I think it's great.
I completely agree. It made me want to go out and start race walking when I watched it. It really makes you want to do it, doesn't it? It's fantastic.
It really does. And I think it's a really good lesson to all of us, because I'm sure, Sue, you're like me, you don't see yourself as being in your late 50s and that you would, or that you wouldn't, that you would give up sport if you've done sport all your life. Why would you stop doing it? But by the same token, it's a whole nother thing seeing people in their 80s still competing, or 90s and 100s. And I would never have thought, I'm not saying I'll be competing, but to have those, I guess they're just like role models to us, middle-aged women, young women, whatever, they are our role models to actually see that still happening. And for them, of course, so much of it is the joy of community and purpose and being together with your friends. And that is a massive part of the film, that really it's the coming together of like-minded people and then just enjoying doing their sport together.
And from a practical point of view of your whole self-taught, like, you're so bloody humble, aren't you? The way just picked up a camera. But in terms of the actual, even with the rowing, were you editing that footage? You're kind of self-taught in terms of all of the editing and the creating the content?
Yeah, thank goodness for YouTube, eh? Google is my friend. Like, how do I do this? There's a lot out there to help. And yeah, I mean, I'm a long way from, and I think the trouble is also, if you kind of learn just by kind of doing, you don't necessarily learn in the correct way. So then when you start working with people that actually know what they're doing, you kind of realize that you're doing it not necessarily wrong, but that there would have been a better way of doing it, But, I didn't have any money or funding, and I didn't have the time to go off to university. So, I mean, it's just finding a way to make it possible, really, and just having a go. And like I said, I suppose it's that old art school sort of beginning of my life that you kind of just get stuck in and have a go and see where you end up. Yeah,
I love that. And your current project is Untethered, so it's a super powerful documentary being made as part of Sky Sports' new Focus Fund, and it was an absolute privilege for me. I got a sneak peek this weekend before its release, and it truly is. It's brilliant. It's really moving. It's really funny as well, and I absolutely loved it. So I guess tell us a little bit more about the subject of the film.
Yeah, so I mean, this is quite close to my heart because, I mean, they all are, obviously. I can't do projects unless I love them. But my daughter is blind, and this is a story about a blind swimmer. So, I understand the experience of, I guess I'm a disability ally. I haven't got the lived experience, but having a daughter that's been blind is, I guess, as close as you get. And I had got into sort of long distance swimming, or just swimming long outdoors, like most people had, in the pandemic. And I'd I just really enjoyed being back in the water, having not really done any canoeing for a long time, and just, I was on the way in. And I came across Melanie Barrett on Facebook in one of the open water swimming groups, and she was using bone conducting headphones to a headset to be able to swim outdoors. So she had been 1996 and 2000 Paralympic champion at swimming. But obviously that's in a pool, and, you can count your strokes. It's very straightforward. It's very manageable in terms of, it's a controlled environment. But to actually swim outside is a whole different thing. So I was like, oh, that's really fascinating. That's interesting. So I just sent her a little message, and I said, Melanie, I'm really interested in what you do. Would you be interested in me doing a little personal project, like a passion project film about you? Maybe I could come and just chat to you, and we'll see if we get on. She lived a couple of hours away up in near Warwick, and we just got on really well. I mean, she's just great. We're like lifelong friends now, but we just got on really well. And so I started doing some filming, and I realized that she had a really low self-esteem, despite being such an incredible athlete because she had had so much discrimination over her life. And she just really struggled with who she was. And so it became the short film became as much about sort of disability politics as it did about the swimming. And then somewhere in this sort of process of us kind of just getting, moving on, and I was like, oh, maybe I try and get some funding. Let's make this something bigger. And then she dropped in this bombshell that, oh, I'm going to try and swim the channel. I'm going to try and be the first blind woman to swim the channel. I'm like, oh my goodness, we really need some budget now, because that is a massive story. And gosh, I've lucked out because I'm absolutely in the right place at the right time, and I've kind of made friends with her.
I didn't know.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that she was going to do that.
I didn't realise that you didn't know that when you first reached out to her. Oh, wow.
And then of course I'm absolutely paranoid that somebody with a proper camera and a and a broadcast company would snap her up. So luckily they didn't. We kept going, and I kept trying to find some funding. And then I bumped into, now Sue, you're going to love this because it's a really nice little thing about networking and providing platforms and places for people to talk. I bumped into Anna Kessel at the launch of your Game Changers film documentary. And she said, oh, I was just telling her about the access side of it that I was doing. So because my daughter's blind, I was learning how to do audio description, and I was learning about captioning, and I was wanting to make the film really accessible. And she was like, oh gosh, this sounds really interesting. We're just about to launch this fund at Sky Sports. It's called the New Focus Fund, and we're really looking for diverse projects. You should enter it. And I found it quite hard to find it, and then I found it, and it was just like a one article, and it was it was a young black guy holding a camera was the image, and I was like, oh, well, they're not going to be interested in me, older woman, Yeah, anyway, wrong point of my career, all of that stuff. Anyway, I applied, and we went through various rounds, and, absolutely amazingly, incredibly, we got selected out of the 10 projects. There were 10 projects that all got selected, and all very different stories, different vibes, different kind of things that they want to do. Some things are just on YouTube, and some things are longer pieces. And then ours is a proper full-length hour and 20-minute documentary about Melanie this year training to swim with the channel, doing the channel, and then a lot about her backstory as well. And it's been an incredible year. I have to say, it has been exceptional. I've loved every minute of it.
And you shared a very powerful post on social media last week talking about how you wanted to incorporate that mantra of nothing about us without us when you're working in that disability space. So what do you mean by that? And I guess how tough was it to make that authentic documentary, as you say, about a blind woman without your lived experience?
Yeah, I was obviously having a daughter who obviously she's grown up, I've brought her up. So I've seen the discrimination firsthand and the struggles, but also she is, she's really proud of who she is, and she's that bit younger. She's got that real sort of sense of being, disability pride and enjoying being different. I have to also give a massive shout out to my dad, who died a few years ago. When my daughter was born, and they first said to us that she, worst case scenario, she could be blind, is what the guy said to me after I'd just given birth. Thanks, guy. That's great. Kind of very, we just didn't really know quite what to do. I wasn't that I was daunted by it, but, you just don't know where to start. And my dad, he was a very creative man, and he said, this will be her greatest asset. And it just flipped our whole thinking on its head. So that was our starting point, that she was going to experience the world in a completely different way to everybody else, and that could be a real major benefit in life. So I've always had a really positive view on disability. And even when we were doing Sports Sister, we always had lots of disability stories. And in fact, we even didn't categorize them as disability. So if it's a swimming story, I just put it in swimming because it's swimming, what difference does it make, really? So, yeah, it was a really interesting one because obviously I wanted to be really sensitive to Melanie's story. I didn't want to, because I gained her trust, and, this is a key thing of making a film, that you have to gain people's trust in order to tell an authentic story. And we had known each other for, a good couple of years by the time we got to this point of doing the actual film. And Melanie did trust me, and she did tell me all sorts of really emotional things from her childhood and growing. And, even as an adult, the discrimination, even now trying to enter mass participation events where, she's barred from doing them, even though she would be in the top 25% of everybody swimming. It's utterly disgraceful that there is this discrimination against disabled people. So it's a fine balance of not telling the story I wanted it to be versus what her story was. And then also involving other disabled people, other disabled talent in the project. So the music was composed by Lloyd Coleman, who works for the Para Orchestra, and he's partially sighted, partially hearing. So, and a swimmer. So he was super excited to be involved. That was really important. My daughter's been involved in terms of doing the audio description and narrating the audio description. We've also had that signed off by Ros Chalmers, who works at the National Theatre and is an absolute legend of audio description and access. And then Dr. Chris Whitaker, who has worked extensively in disability space. He watched it and with his wife, Fran, and they gave me their feedback. So it was, and obviously Melanie watched it before we put it anywhere to make sure that everybody was really comfortable with the narrative, that it was true to her experience and true to her. And I know a lot of people are quite often surprised when I say that I would have changed it if Melanie wasn't happy with it, but I would have done, because if she didn't like it, then I don't want it going out there myself. I would have loved to have had a disabled person doing the filming if possible, or that's something to work on, to get more disabled talent working in the industry generally so that they are telling their own stories.
And how are you feeling now ahead of release? So it's going to be at film festivals and on Sky, I think, isn't it? When can we see it?
Yeah, so it's coming out we're premiering at Kendal Mountain Film Festival on the 21st of November, and I believe it's going out on Sky Sports around the same time. But watch this space. We'll let everybody know as soon as it comes out. It's going to be fairly unique in as much as the audio description, which is normally something you switch on or off, is going to be live for everybody to hear. We've kind of combined it with a sort of a narration style audio description, so it's kind of almost seamless. We've got open captions on the screen for everybody, and we've also got BSL on screen. So it's the idea was, when I pitched it, was that it was taking into consideration Melanie's needs first. So Melanie, the athlete, needed to be able to access this film as a priority over everybody else, which is completely the opposite to how everything is done generally, where access is tacked on afterwards. So that was my starting point, and that's what we've done.
That's brilliant. And I guess I appreciate from my own experience of making documentaries, not as many as you, but a few, but how tough it can be to find that funding, especially for non-mainstream films, and especially when you haven't got the big name, household names in terms of your kind of content, the people to follow. I guess, how have you dealt with that, and where have you found your funding? You've talked a little bit about, obviously, the Sky Fund and the funding for older as well too, but where have you gone to find that funding?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's not easy. It's really not easy. I'm not even, as you know, I'm not really very good at self-promotion either. So, like, in terms of putting myself out there to try and get funding, I'm blooming useless, really. So some of it's just been kind of luck, to be honest. And I mean, Independent Age coming on board through for younger was through a contact. I mean, it's getting to know people, it's networking, it's all that kind of stuff. It really makes a big difference. I wouldn't have met Anna, I knew Anna, but I wouldn't have known about the fund if I hadn't met her at your event. It's kind of just building contacts over a long period of time. But I have no idea how I'm going to fund my next film yet. So it's every time you start something new, it's another challenge. And like you say, if you're not doing a big name story, then it's even more challenging. But actually, for me, I mean, that's where the real gold lies, is in those untold stories, and that's what I really love. So I'll just carry on doing what I'm doing and find a way, because that's just who I am and what I love doing. And yeah, it's not that I'm wealthy. I'm just very low maintenance, I guess. I don't need much to be happy.
I love that. And finally, obviously, you've achieved so many extraordinary things in terms of driving change in women's sport, but also more broadly across society. So have you got, as you sit here now, and obviously there's lots with getting this film out this autumn, but are there other things in the pipeline? What more would you like to do? It feels like you've had quite a diverse range of things that you've done across your career. Is there Anything you're setting your mind to?
Well, I mean, this is it for me now, like documentaries. I absolutely loved it. I think it's the best, the thing that I've enjoyed absolutely the most in my career. I mean, I've loved everything, but this one really it brings all my skills together. So like that art school background, but then the storytelling of being a journalist, and then obviously women's sport and diverse stories and the unheard stories. It just brings everything together. So I'm definitely staying in the documentary place if I can. I mean, there is so much still to be done, Sue. I mean, where are all the big stories? Where are the films about our major female sports stars? They just aren't out there. You look out there and there's all these men stories, I find that really frustrating. Obviously, that's more challenging because then you've got lots of archive, which is massively expensive. But I think there's a lot of stories that need to be told that are much more mainstream than I would normally do, but are really important that we have those women's histories out there, the women that have been before and have done these incredible things and been such high achievers and are such role models to so many. I think we need to see those stories. But I think, we just need more and more. We just need to hear of all these different women from different backgrounds with different body types, different sports that they love. We just haven't got a diverse range of role models out there for young women yet. And that's what I'm focusing on.
What an absolute pleasure to talk to Danielle. I love her passion to do the right thing and how she's willing to just have a go at everything. It's so refreshing to hear. If you'd like to hear from more trailblazers like Danielle, there are over 200 episodes of The Game Changers that are free to listen to on all podcast platforms or from our website at fearlesswomen.co.uk. Along with elite athletes, you can also hear from coaches, entrepreneurs, broadcasters, scientists, journalists and CEOs, all women who are changing the game in sport. As well as listening to all the podcasts on the website, you can also find out more about the Women's Sport Collective, a free, inclusive community for all women working in sport. We now have over 8,500 members across the world, so please do come and join us. The whole of my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport, is also free to listen to on the podcast. Every episode of Series 13 is me reading a chapter of the book. Thanks again to Sport England for backing the Game Changers and the Women's Sport Collective through a National Lottery Award, and to Sam Walker at What Goes On Media, who does such a brilliant job as our executive producer. Thank you also to my lovely colleague, Kate Hannon. You can find The Game Changers on all podcast platforms, so please follow us now and you won't miss out on future episodes. Do come and say hello on social media, where you'll find me at Sue Anstis. The Game Changers. Fearless women in sport.